everyone, and welcome to the SaaS Developer channel, where we talk about how to build SaaS and learn from each other. And with me today, I have special guest, Tarr from the AWS SaaS Factory. And the really cool thing about Bill is that he spends all day, every day, talking to people building SaaS. So it's not just learning from Bill, it's learning from all the people who shared things with Bill. So you kind of get a lot more for one interview, which is very efficient. Great to have you on the show, Bill.
Thanks, Gwen. Hopefully I can live up to that billing. I'll just give you a quick intro. I belong to a team called the SaaS Factory. So not only do you get all of my expertise of talking to SaaS customers, and I probably talk to roughly about 100 SaaS companies a year through different types of engagement that we have, but I also belong to a team where there's about 30 of us who talk to SaaS customers all day. There are about 14 people who are solutions architects like myself. As you might see from my title down there, I call myself a SaaS evangelist, and no one seems to complain that I do. Our official titles are partner solutions architects. So we partner with people who are building SaaS on AWS to help them to build better SaaS. Our sort of day-to-day is these longer term engagements where we'll work with the customer building SaaS on AWS from the inception of their idea until when they launch their SaaS product. And that's sort of our goal. That's what we're trying to achieve, is launches of SaaS on AWS as a team. And our team is split up between two different segments. We have the technical side, like myself, and you'd fit on the technical side of this perfectly well if you joined us, Gwen. That's sort of where most of the people on this call probably find themselves. But I think also people listening here to the SaaS developer community also realize that SaaS is a business model, right? That SaaS is not just a technical idea, but rather a business model that your whole organization has to transform into. And we also have business experts who are on our team who will guide you through a lot of those other aspects around the business side of SaaS. In addition to our expertise in technical side, they can talk your team through the go-to-market aspects, the pricing aspects, the marketing, and those sales and organizational transformations, what really force a company that already exists, has legacy products, and is delivered in other models, that they have to transform their organization to be able to successfully sell a SaaS product.
Wow, you're doing a lot.
Yeah. Fortunately, I have a team around me. I don't think I could do all of that, but I try to do my part.
Yeah, and you also made a great point that a lot of times very technical founders working on SaaS, they actually have a lot of the technical side down pat, and the business model part is maybe where they could actually partner and get more help.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when we engage with customers, oftentimes we'll meet very smart architects and they're like, hey, we've got a pretty good idea what we want to build here. We understand what multi-tenancy means. We understand how to build on AWS, but we've never built a SaaS product before. So, tell us what we don't know. And that usually starts with a business conversation. Like, what you don't know probably is mostly in this area of business. How do you want to set up your organization? How are you going to structure things? How are you going to sell this product? And once you start talking about those things, some of the technical things start to fall out to support those as well. Like, hey, are you really thinking of observability as a first-class citizen? Because if you're not in a SaaS product, it's never going to succeed, right? But you don't get to that technical thought until you think about the business reason behind it, that you have to have the business be able to steer a SaaS product, which is covering tens, hundreds, thousands of different customers through a single pane of glass.
Technical decisions are so intertwined with business decision. For example, one of the things that you guys published last year that I think really clarified a lot is kind of the tenancy model and how you can have things that are more siloed versus more shared, and you had whole gamut of options in multiple ways. And at the end of the day, if you don't know how much a customer is going to pay, then it's really hard to know how much you can afford to isolate for them and how much to give them. So it's a lot of those technical decisions are rooted in business decisions and vice versa. Like if sometimes you have a great business model, but then we cannot actually implement it efficiently enough to make it work.
Exactly that. And even if you said, hey, we've got a really clear technical direction and we understand and we have alignment with the business, as those things change, once you even launch your product, how do you understand, is that pricing successful? Did we actually nail what we were trying to build? Are our customers reacting to it? And if you don't have visibility into those things, if you don't understand the underlying costs, if you don't understand the usage of that, there's no way that the business is going to be able to steer those decision points as you go forward. And the more data you collect and the more you learn up front. And I didn't mean to just jump and start talking about
Yeah, I'm just saying
observability,
you're getting
but
ahead of yourself here.
oh yeah, yeah. It really, but a lot of this is really what explains why we think of this connection between the business and the technical, and why our team is built the way that we're built.
Let's take a step back here. You are more or less back from reInvent. I hope the highlights of reInvent are still fresh in your mind. What were the biggest things for SaaS developers to know that went down?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things I would highlight. So first, reInvent's an amazing experience for SaaS. I think, as you know, Gwen, I think you and I have talked a lot about the fact that SaaS, when we talk about it in the outlying communities, when we talk about events, they're really just aiming at founders for the most part right now. And there aren't a lot of technical events where people are aiming a lot of technical content at technical stakeholders. To me, reInvent is still the largest SaaS technical event out there. AWS has a huge focus on SaaS. It's very important to our organization. Our track pod had over 20 different talks that we did just on SaaS. That's not including other really interesting talks like Amazon Prime getting up and talking about how they do observability at the massive scale of Amazon Prime. That's an amazing talk that's on YouTube, by the way. If you haven't seen it, that team did an amazing job talking about that.
We'll
But
track down the link and you'll have it
oh,
in the
it
notes below.
absolutely do. Yeah, it's a great talk. I got to review it even before it launched, and I learned quite a bit listening to their team, because you don't generally get to hear people talk about what does SaaS mean when the scale is millions of users simultaneously, as opposed to million users a year or whatever most SaaS products are getting. So there's certainly that aspect. If you're a SaaS developer and you have an opportunity to get to reInvent, you could go and just see SaaS content, SaaS related content all week, and only focus on that and have a great experience. There's a lot of other things I'm sure you'd want to see, serverless and containers, everything else. But to me, that's really one of the big highlights I would want people to take a look at, including one of my own, if I could toot my own horn, talking about the pitfalls, architectural pitfalls of SaaS. And we'll put that link down there too, right? So yeah, the pitfalls of SaaS. I loved that talk. It was a lot of fun. Things like that are sort of the highlight for me. But another thing that we did, Gwen, this year, that I think will resonate with you. You and I helped to organize an event in San Jose earlier this year, an
That was fun.
in-person. That was a lot of, I wish I could have gone. I missed that one, but my teammates were there, and I understand it was a great experience. We did something really similar at reInvent this year. We put together an event we called the SaaS Community Lounge. Just open invited all of the SaaS people that we could get our hands on. It was kind of last minute. Yeah, I was just shaking the trees and seeing if SaaS people would fall out of the trees. We only had a room that only held 50 people at a time. We ran into the same problem we ran into San Jose. They were ready to kick us out of the room. We were making so much noise and everybody was having such a great time. We invited just the people we sort of knew and our SaaS competency partners, who are the SI partners who we've qualified for their SaaS expertise. We invited some of them and some customers we've worked with, and some of the community members, some of the AWS heroes and community builders. We had a lot of them in the room together, and it was really exciting for me. One of the things that we partnered on and that we have in common is this sort of belief that there is a technical community around developers in SaaS that doesn't exist today, or didn't exist until the moment you created it on Slack. That this community was it was an idea that made sense, but nobody was really pursuing it. For whatever reasons, all of the conferences kind of ignore the technical track. People really focus on the founders. And I think there's a little bit of a feeling like, oh, well, SaaS isn't a technical, a coherent technical concept. I think it is. I think there's a lot that we can talk about together.
Exactly. And you keep seeing those new companies that, because SaaS is a business model, they build things in a different way. Like just a while back, I had Ryan from WarpStream, my channel. He's building an architecture based on S3. He absolutely could not do it on-prem. It would make no sense without SaaS as a business model to build this architecture. And it opened up, it solved a really serious problem to what turned out to be way larger segment of the market than anyone anticipated. So those kind of things where you tie technology to business together because you understand the technology so well and so deeply, it just seems like there is so much more that could be happening there.
Yeah, and I watched that episode, by the way. It was really interesting to hear Ryan talk. He's had the experience. He's worked with AWS before. He spent the time. He understood all of the underlying pricing of specific services like S3. It was interesting to hear him talk about the value proposition, even of the different S3 pricing tiers. Right? He was looking at
Exactly.
these things, and
He's
I think
going to build an experience that would let his customer pick the right tier for them, which is fantastic.
it's amazing. And he was already even using the Express One tier, One Zone, I think, right? So he was
Yeah,
using that tier as well because of its lower latency, lower cost structure. And for the product he's building, he immediately saw the niche that would fit into. Because I'm not going to go to all my customers and say, hey, you should start using Express One Zone. You're reducing your reliability in terms of and resilience, but longer term, you're getting lower price and higher performance and lower latency. And he's managed to leverage that and say, hey, I can turn around and copy these things into other storage models later with longer term resiliency. It's very cool. It's very cool to hear how people with a SaaS first mindset immediately see the ability to react to new services AWS develops and integrate them. And if I understood right, he's practically already live with that feature, which we just launched like a month ago. So it's
oh,
pretty incredible how fast you're able to move in a SaaS model, right?
exactly that. Exactly
Yeah.
that. Imagine having to wait for your customers to upgrade before you can deliver value. I mean,
I
how would
mean,
you even build a business like that?
we all did it for decades, right? Like, all right, here's our quarterly release. Here you go. I hope we didn't mess it up because you're not going to get another one for 3 months. Like, hope your
Exactly.
bug fixes are in there. It's amazing to see how companies like Ryan's are delivering bug fixes daily, right? If you find something wrong with their system, you turn on tomorrow, it's gone already. Like, wow, that's it. And for them, it's their culture, right? They're not shifting and trying to build those cultures. Their culture is continuous delivery. Their culture is continually adding value to customers, and that agility that they can achieve in SaaS is very real. It's not an artificial thing that they're saying, oh, like, yeah, we're really fast. No, they literally are delivering value to customers on a daily basis, and
And
that's
then
pretty
there's also
incredible.
geographical agility for SaaS. Like if you think about what it used to take to expand to Europe in the old days. And
Yeah,
now we had a great talk from Tereska, which he used to work, I think, at AWS. So another person who knows all the inside story. And he
yeah,
talked about how he can spin up new regions essentially at zero cost. And he's like, oh yeah, I'm losing a Lambda here and I'm using SQS over there and
yes,
it's an entire architecture, very technical conversation, but it's obviously only of value to a business where very rapid geographical expansion is the way they're doing things, which is
right.
more or less only the SaaS business model.
Yes. Yeah. And if you start off with that mindset, you can react to it. I wish I could say the name, but they haven't quite launched yet. I worked with a chip manufacturer last year who's building a new AI product. It's going to be incredible. Out of the gate, they started off with an architecture that's a cell-based architecture that they can drop into any AWS region at any point and onboard a customer into that region without any extra overhead on their part, right? I mean, there's things you have to think about in a multi-region architecture. It's not free and it's not obvious always. But they just need to build out the infrastructure in each of those regions for a control plane or whatever they're going to use to control all of those cells. That's their overhead. Once they've done that, they can create as many cells for as many customers in whatever regions those customers want to be in. It's pretty incredible. It's incredible how fast they'll be able to move.
And if you're able to leverage Lambda, then there is no infrastructure overhead for regions unless there are actual customer activity, which is
Exactly. Yeah,
really
that,
cool.
that alignment of consumption and cost that you can get to in the cloud. And I mean, not to wax too much into the controversial side of things, but I think there's some authors out there who are publishing some sort of move back from the cloud into data center conversations, and I think they're being very genuine about their positions. For them, maybe it worked out. Maybe that was the best thing for their business. I don't want to say that it wasn't. I think for most of the time when I talk to customers building SaaS and building in the cloud, if they've taken advantage of all of the opportunities that cloud gives them, they're successful and they see the value of cloud. If they're thinking of the cloud as, well, I just took what I was building over here and I dropped it into the cloud, and for some reason now it's more expensive, well, you lost the value proposition of the cloud because you
Yeah.
didn't take the time to decompose it. And for SaaS providers, I find that mindset is antithetical to SaaS, right? Like you don't find successful SaaS providers having this monolithic mindset. It's always very agile, and you almost inevitably end up decomposing what you're doing to a point where you can get the agility that you need in
Yeah.
SaaS.
And to be fair, I mean, if you are an older company that has moved to the cloud after many years of running a data center, it's probably very different than being a young company. You, as I said, you need to
Yes.
still find your market. You need to move fast. You haven't hired anyone who knows how to build data centers
Yes.
anytime.
Right.
I mean,
They haven't seen
it's
one.
very
They're like, I
different.
don't know what you're talking about with this data center thing. It's all AWS, right?
I
No.
knew
Yeah.
one person who knows how to build data centers, and I'm pretty old. So back when I worked at HP, I worked with a guy who led data center team, amazing networking guy. Well, 20 years have passed. You know where he works now?
AWS.
Of course. Exactly.
Of course he is. Yeah. I mean, we have great people who built data centers, and there's some awesome conversations about like some of the hardcore networking behind the scenes, and there's still people who do this in the real world too, right? There still
Yeah.
are data centers, and that still is a model for some people. But yeah, I've worked with some legacy companies too. Some of them who published their case studies, like Samsung SDS out of Korea. They've done an amazing job of transforming a set of legacy software into SaaS-based architectures. Very smart company, a lot of great technical expertise. They looked at the suite of products that they had and said, these are okay. People are using them here in Korea, but that's pretty much as far as our reach goes. How do we get outside of this? And they only had data centers in Korea, of course. That was where they were based out of. They picked their first product, Brightix AI. We helped them to migrate that to a SaaS model. They turned around and turned that experience into a center of excellence and are SaaSifying their whole suite of products. So it really depends on the mindset of the company. If you have a legacy mindset and you think like, yeah, we have to keep doing things the way we've always done them, it can be very difficult to transition those into the
And as
cloud.
you said, it's the business model, but also there is so much technology.
You and I both work with a lot of startups. I don't go to startups and say, you must build perfect SaaS before you can launch, and thou shall have a control plane, and thou shall, like, I'm not going to hand them a set of 10 commandments
None
and
of
say, you
us
need to
would
go build these
launch
things.
if we wait for stuff to be perfect until we launch.
Exactly. And as a startup, you have a lot of freedom. You say, like, so listen, find your product market fit. Don't worry about anything else until you can get to those first 10 companies. We can talk about what good SaaS looks like. There's no reason to ignore what good SaaS looks like. But we can prioritize and say, listen, put everything in a separate account for now. Every customer gets a separate account. Deploy your software into there. Maybe that's a little manual even right now. Maybe Gwen is still hitting a button every time we do a launch, and that goes out to these different customers because we don't want to automate too much too quickly. But we know we should. We know that we're building up a little technical debt, and as we hit that product market fit and start to hit a growth curve, we need to quickly pivot and take care of a lot of that technical debt and build the automation that we've been sort of skipping over and get to that point. But it's a sliding scale. I also don't try to like shove the mountain onto people and let them get buried under an avalanche of technical knowledge they need to gain. Especially for startups, there's a lot of flexibility, and companies, especially if you select early build partners, if you're not just thinking of your early stage customers as customers, thinking of them as partners who you're working with on your product with, you have a lot of flexibility.
And that's a good tip right here. Thinking of early customers as partners, I
Yes.
just want to defend my team's honor. We are not clicking on a button every time we have a customer.
Good. I think as long as you're transparent with your customers, those early stage customers, those partners, and say, listen, we're building these things out. Maybe you're not, maybe there might be a moment of downtime between releases because we don't have full blue-green deployments yet, and we're not able to keep 100%
Exactly.
uptime that we're going to promise. I think partners are willing to listen and work with you on those things, especially with early stage companies. If they love what you're building, they're investing into it. Your early stage customers are investing into you by buying your product. And you treat, hopefully over the time, you will continue to treat those partners as partners and remember that they were the ones who got you there. But to whatever extent you can, you guys are a born in the cloud SaaS provider, and you have a very experienced team. I think several of your people are from Confluent, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
If you have that expertise to draw from, then build as much of that SaaS goodness as you can up front. It's not always the case. I've worked with quite a few startups that are essentially a couple of data engineers who built a really cool AI product, and all of the technology side of this is gray to them. Like they kind of know how to deploy their product. They understand they can deploy it to the cloud, and they understand their customers want it there. Hopefully they just don't build a big enough foot gun where by the time they have to erase that technical debt, that they have to go and rebuild everything that they built for those customers. That's what most of what you're trying to avoid in that early
Exactly.
stage.
I have a question for you, since you've
Sure.
been seeing all those customers and all those scenarios, and you kind of keep in touch with people over time. One theory that I've seen floating around the Twitterverse is that the whole zero downtime was a zero interest rate idea. That now that money is more expensive, that it's harder to hire people, that infrastructure cost may start to matter more, people are looking at the extra nines as maybe it's more of a luxury that we cannot afford at the moment, and a bit of downtime is actually okay. Are you seeing a similar trend, or is it just in my corner of the world?
I don't know if I'm necessarily seeing that trend, but again, it kind of depends who you're talking to, right? So right now, my experience this year, I had a lot of big enterprise customers, and they have big enterprise customers, and they are still thinking about those nines. They are still trying to aim for zero downtime. I think there's a sliding scale to all of these things. If you're an early stage SaaS customer and funding is really front and center in your mind, trying to get to that point. If your customers are startup customers, there's more of a negotiation to be had there. Are your customers really asking for all those nines, or is it just your assumption that everyone wants those nines? Is your product mission critical to them? Because if it is, then yeah, you want those nines. If MRIs are being loaded up into your system and patients are on the table, they're trying to figure out where do we cut. Then I want a lot of nines. Give me all your nines. If I'm on the table and you're deciding where the incision's going to be, like I'd like that to happen as quickly as possible, please. Most SaaS isn't in that category, right? A lot of SaaS is going to be, what are the business outcomes that are projectable out of this? Observability is a big, a lot of great SaaS products are observability tools themselves. Yeah, there could be some really important points to that are real time. Others maybe not so much. Can you differentiate those workloads and say, here's our business critical workloads? These are the ones that are gonna, we're gonna guarantee uptime on. Here's some other ones that you might wait a little while for. So even by workload case, can you say for your SaaS product, hey, these are the things that we're promising higher SLAs for. These other ones, yeah, not so much. You'll get those when you get them. Expect these within an hour. Now, I mean, it's kind of interesting coming from where you're coming from, though, Gwen, because you're building databases as a service.
Yeah, we
So
are working on all the nines.
I would think your customers want a lot of nines, right? Like, oh, you can't have your data right now. Sorry
Yeah,
about that.
yeah. So that's the thing, right? They definitely want us to have great uptime. But when
Right.
it comes to us asking them, so would you pay for a remote replica and for the traffic to
Right.
the remote replica? And that's where people are like, well, that means I have to pay twice. And how much downtime do I really have?
Yes. And that's, I mean, that's the right way to couch the conversation, I think, when it's not so much whether it's chasing nines or not. The question really is, given an actual disaster, what are your real SLAs? What is your time to recovery that you're really thinking you want? And God forbid if the region that you're deployed in does have something going on, is this really your biggest concern? Oh, our Nile database isn't available right now. Oh, by the way, all of these other things aren't available as well. Everything's probably a little bit on pause. So, you know, while we certainly have lots of customers who do multi-region and say, listen, we want our database here and we want a copy over here, that isn't the right answer for everybody. And being able to break those down to different offerings like you're doing and say, you can have this as an option is the right answer for SaaS providers to be able to say, well, you can pay for this price point. And depending on your business, in your case, I would say uptime, latency, there's different measurements that I want for the SLAs for these different pricing tiers. For the basic pricing tier, well, you're definitely not getting multi-region. You'd be lucky if you get multi-AZ. I'll give you a database and it will be up when it's up and we'll tell you when it's not. And that's that experience. And then there's, some other tiers, the standard tier, where we're going to, do multi-AZ. We're going to guarantee you some more uptime. Your experience will be, seamless through updates and everything else because we can do blue-green deployments for you, whatever else those experiences look like, versus this enterprise tier where it's a big customer and they need to know that, that you fit into their compliance and data recovery story and resilience and all of those things that they're expecting. If they're going to build you into their business critical pipelines, it's a very different scenario. So I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And to the extent that you can, to the extent that you can break these down and think about them as pricing tiers or options you're offering your customers, that's the right strategy for SaaS. And regardless of what you think your uptime is, you can always do better if someone's willing to pay you piles of money to do it. Like if somebody is, hey, throw me $1 million, I will build you the most resilient system ever built on the face of the earth. It will be in every region of every cloud provider on earth, and it will never go down. Well, I mean, nobody can afford it. So what's the next best thing? Well, what is the thing that you really need, that your customers really need, and work backwards from that?
I think you touched on an extremely important point, which is what each customer could, based on their needs, actually cost you something slightly different.
Yes.
And you may need to adjust pricing to match correctly, or at least make sure that things aggregate correctly to avoid your business not actually being a business for very long. And you've given what I understand was a Blackboard chat about it in reInvent, which guarantees that there is about 1,000 people right now listening to this video who have not seen you present in Vegas, but could probably use some of those ideas as they're building things. So can you share a bit about your big idea?
I'll give you some of the high level of this. It was an hour talk, and we're not going to talk for another hour. So I won't give you all of the details, but it was a really good session for people who haven't been to reInvent. And again, I'm going to encourage all you SaaS developers to try to get to reInvent next year. We have different types of talks. We have a breakout talk, which we record. It's just a room full of people. It's a step below the keynotes where, it's a very broad experience. Hundreds of people will watch. They go on YouTube forever. So when you do something silly like forget to introduce yourself on your introductory slide, that's out there forever. I don't know who did that. I won't point any fingers. But if you do, these are a big deal. We spend a lot of time, developing the exact messaging, delivering the messaging as best we can. They live out there forever. They're all of our best practices. We understand them. Chalk talks, while they meet a lot of those same bars, are a conversation. We go into the room with 50 to 100 people maybe, and we build these to be conversation pieces. So we'll build a deck and we'll say, we've got slides for you. We'll talk you through the different ways to build this, but if you guys don't ask us questions, this is going to be sort of a boring topic. So that's how we drove this one. We had some really good questions in the room from people. I had someone who was sitting in the front row who was really peppering us with a bunch of Kubernetes questions, which was really awesome. So he was doing a lot of the stuff we were already saying. And it's the interesting thing about being in reInvent. You can go anywhere from the range of like, wow, I never even thought of this topic. This is an amazing topic. Like, thinking about cost per tenant, like we're not even doing anything with that right now. Like we're going to start go home and do this now, to this guy in the front row who's like, I'm already doing all of that except this one thing that you mentioned. Like, so I learned one thing today and that was worth me coming, because I'm doing everything else you said. I've got this down, but you said, try this way, and I'm going to go home and try it that way. So it's an amazing sort of range of these things. But if I could sort of give you my 5-minute talk on cost per tenant in AWS, it goes something like this. With different architectures in SaaS in particular, you want to be able to get down to a point where you can understand maybe not the exact costs of what it costs to operate an individual tenant in your solution, but you want to get down to the unit economics of your SaaS solution. And what I mean by the unit economics is, if you think holistically about a shared solution, imagine, a Lambda-based solution for serverless. You've got Lambdas, you've got DynamoDB. All of your tenants are sharing all of that infrastructure. So how can you possibly measure what the underlying costs are of all of the piece of that? Well, you could break it down by tenant. You could break it down by your different pricing tiers. You could break it down by transaction. All sorts of different ways you could think about this data. What you want to do as a technologist is provide your business with the tools and the metrics that give them the ability to slice and dice all of your cost data, so that they can get down to that unit of visibility without you even understanding what those units are. We have to sort of anticipate some of those units. Like, oh, we can figure maybe they'll want to break costs down by region. Maybe they'll want to break down costs by pricing tier. But over time, we want them to have the freedom to be able to break it down by any number of other ways. So, depending on your architecture, you talked a little bit about tenant isolation before. You may have a very simple story on AWS for doing cost per tenant, and that might be as simple as tagging. If you have completely siloed infrastructure where every one of your customers gets their own AWS account, well, life is pretty easy. Your AWS bill for that account is how much it costs for you to support that tenant. That's great. I would still say that's one unit that you want to measure. So being able to measure your cost per tenant is extremely valuable. That was a lot of the point of our talk. I would still say, if you aren't thinking about your other units of cost, that you should still be thinking about this type of unit economics, even if you're in a silo model where each of your customers has their own account. Because what happens when your business team comes back and says, well, what does it cost for us to support this specific feature? We've got a number of different features in our product. We want to set up pricing tiers. How do I know how much to charge for this specific part of the application? So we're going to say our advanced tier customers are the only ones that get access to this really cool AI feature we've built. How do we know how much we should charge for that? Well, if you don't have cost as an input into that decision, you're just guessing, right? You're just hoping that the numbers are going to pencil out and you're going to cover enough cost. And as anyone who's ever priced things before knows, once you set a price in the marketplace, it's very difficult to raise that price and say like, oh, no, by the way, we were wrong on how much this is going to cost. You now have to pay double for this feature. You lose a lot of customers that way. You lose trust with your customers. So you want to be able to anticipate those costs as much as possible.
Prices are only allowed to go down, right?
Right. And I mean, the AWS, you see this experience all the time. We're very hesitant to raise prices. We really resist raising prices, and we try to introduce as many price reductions as possible in any given year. And we kind of goal ourselves on reducing prices on things. And that's a real challenge. Like over time, yeah, things will probably go up, but we challenge ourselves to drive more efficiencies and introduce price reductions. And I think, thinking about yourself as a SaaS provider, while you might have some very simple cases, if you have a silo architecture of being able to simply measure the cost of specific tenants and specific accounts, there's still a metrics and analytics story, very much like we started off in this conversation with on observability. Eventually, you're going to have to get to a point where you can actually be able to emit metrics about cost and tie those into your AWS bill. That's really the gist of the talk that we gave, Gwen. How do we get to a point where you're emitting metrics that are tied to tenancy, whether you have a serverless architecture or a containers architecture? that you're emitting metrics, and you can turn around and tie those to your AWS cost and usage report, which is, for anyone who's not familiar with it, all of the individual line item costs of what it costs you to execute everything you've done in AWS essentially land in S3, right? Or you set up your cost and usage report. It tells you line item by line item, when you executed this Lambda at this time, it cost you this much money to do so, right? To be able to take those metrics and tie those into your cost and usage report or some other pricing source. And, that could be like we have our AWS pricing list. So you could use the AWS, public pricing as well and simply say, you know what? It's great that you tell us exactly how much execution costs. That's a little too much detail for me. I just know that, to run a specific EC2 instance type in this region is going to cost me 10 cents an hour. That's enough. I'm going to calculate based on that. And I'm not going to try to understand what AWS is telling me they're charging for that. I'm just going to figure out based on their public pricing. So you have to be able to tie these metrics to some data source, whether that's your cost and usage report, whether it's the AWS price list API, however you're going to do that. That's really the magic that all of the different solutions we were showing at that session reflected. So with serverless, we created a simple model. I don't really want to show slides today because we don't really have enough time, but maybe we should, what, Gwen, let's also make a point to record this for building SaaS on AWS. We'll make sure to get this recording out there because I think some of the magic here in terms of how you do this is going to get lost in this. But we proposed a serverless model, of using CloudWatch to be able to emit the tenant specific metrics. So you take your JOT token because people are, all of your tenants are logged in. We have your identity, emitting all of your metrics with that tenant identity embedded in them, and then being able to aggregate that usage with CloudWatch. So CloudWatch has aggregation services built into it. So to be able to say, I'm just going to take my CloudWatch insights and I'm going to group up all of my tenant usage, all of my usage by tenant, and then I'm going to turn around and correlate that to my cost and usage report. That was really the serverless model we were proposing. On the container side of things, I'm a big fan of KubeCost. I think that's a really cool product.
I think it keeps coming up pretty much whenever I'm interviewing someone.
Yes, it's there's more than one way to do this. There's some really interesting AWS partners. Anytime you find, stepping back from this specific, you guys understand this very well on the Nile. When you look at AWS, you can always find gaps in the services we offer. We're simply not going to be able to build every service for every use case that's out there. And this is where our partner solutions are incredibly valuable. The Nile is filling a use case. I mean, if we turned around and told the RDS team to go and build that, I'm sure eventually on the roadmap, they would put it on the roadmap and they'd build something at least similar to what you guys are doing. It might take years because there's so many things these different service teams are trying to do. It's the same thing with cost metering. Our partners have really stepped up into this gap where, at least right now, it's very difficult with the built-in AWS tools to get full visibility into cost per tenant and into these unit economics. So, KubeCost has done a really nice job of creating a tool that already ties into both the AWS price list and to the cost and usage report. You can run KubeCost on a specific containers cluster, an EKS cluster, and it will gather up the usage for you and also tie that back to the underlying AWS costs. That's a really nice service, and it's free. KubeCost free version. You can install that on a Kubernetes cluster today, and it will provide all of that inside of a cluster for you for free. It's kind of incredible, actually, that they're able to do that. Their value proposition is all about enterprise customers, and they're willing to give away a lot of really useful product to reach that point. So I would encourage anyone watching who's doing Kubernetes today, just go and install a KubeCost instance on your clusters. It's really not too hard. They have a really easy guide for deploying it onto EKS. Out of the gate, it will point to the AWS price list API, which isn't bad. That's a pretty good starting point. They give you instructions to wire it up to the cost and usage report as well. So that model also works really well. If you get into a multi-cluster model, that's when it gets a little bit more complicated. So then you have to worry about aggregating that data together. QCost also has built an integration with Amazon Managed Prometheus and Grafana to allow you to aggregate all of the different data from different QCosts into a single viewpoint where you'd be viewing it through Amazon Managed Grafana, then using Prometheus to gather up all the data. And also one of our internal
You
teams.
have AWS
Yeah.
managed Grafana?
Yes, AWS managed Prometheus and Grafana, both
Amazing.
AMP and AMG for short. Yeah, if you're not using it today, if you're in the Kubernetes world, it's a pretty valuable tool. I have had some customers. I had a large healthcare customer last year because they were deploying across multiple regions, but still had to aggregate all of that data together. Amazon Managed Prometheus Grafana is what they picked to aggregate all of their different cluster data together for analytics. So yeah, pretty
Today I
cool
learned.
tool.
You say every time we talk, I learn something new.
I hope that remains true because that means I'm learning new stuff as well, Gwen. So far, I haven't been bored yet at AWS. They keep introducing new services, and I keep having to go learn all of this stuff too. So I haven't been bored yet. I started off 4 years ago. I think we had 120 some services. We're well over 200 today, and that's just the services. That's not all of the features and all of the specific things that they're introducing all of the time. Keeps you on your toes.
Yeah,
It's
I
good
was just
business.
thinking, like, how do you even?
You don't. You make a lot of friends, and you learn who you can ask about specific topics. So when I engage with customers, I do my best to talk to the 200-300 level about as many of these services as possible. Eventually, you're going to hit a wall. Like you may have you think you have the best idea in the world about observability and let's say OpenSearch. Well, there is a guy in OpenSearch, John Handler, who I always reach out to when I've got questions, who understands every aspect of OpenSearch that anybody has ever thought about since the beginning of time, as far as I can tell. Like he understands all of like back in version 6.7, that was this, and then that changed into this in 6.8. But so if you have data from back then, you're going to have to do this to it. Like those type of things, you've got to find where the experts are at AWS, internal or external. Talking to those specialists who deep dive on these topics will always save you, whether you're a customer or an AWS SA. You can't know everything. I mean, that's true of even a specific technology, but when you're talking about 200 different services and all of the associated partner solutions around this ecosystem, you have no hope of ever knowing everything about everything. Do your best, get as much, core knowledge about all of these things as you can, and then know who you can ask to take it to the next level. That's how I survived. I don't know if that's everybody's case, because I've met some amazing people who know a lot of stuff, more than me. But we all do our best to make sure we stay abreast of all of the changes. And reInvent, again, for customers, is a great way to do that. We don't get to go to the sessions. So when we go to reInvent, we're like raccoons, like looking over the wall, like trying to catch a peek of what other people are talking about. But for customers, it's an amazing experience. Like you can pack in 20 or 30 sessions introducing all these topics. So that's where it's at for customers.
We are starting to wind toward the end of the conversation, and there was one thing I really wanted to hear from you, which you've seen all those architectures from all those people building SaaS on AWS. What are some of the coolest things you've seen people do?
I mean, there's so many interesting models. I think a lot of what we're seeing right now that at least seems cool to us is the AI tools that are being built, especially ones that are dealing with cool use cases. I won't throw the customer's name out there because I don't think they quite published their blog with us yet. But one of my teammates was working with a really cool AI customer that's working with restaurants. And as you can imagine, you understand distributed data and how they were thinking about AI and all of these individual restaurant endpoints and the network that they had created. Like they created this very cool concept of basically putting many EKS clusters or not many Kubernetes clusters, K3 in each of the restaurants on a very small piece of hardware, gathering up all of the data, and then creating the cloud infrastructure to continually gather up that data, gather intelligence, and then push it back down. It's one of the coolest things I've seen lately, because part of the coolness of this, because I mean, I've seen some amazing things. I worked with a healthcare provider that's working with MRI machines. Amazing stuff. All of the technology behind that is mind blowing. But it's these unusual cases like restaurants. You're not thinking like, oh, there's a lot of AI going into fast food, but there is, right? There's a lot of intelligence being driven down to all of these different industries, and it's not just the big thing. You assume that biofarm is going to have amazing AI, and they do, right? Like they're using all of those things, and they're on the cutting edge. At the same time, a lot of traditional industries where you're like, oh, there's probably not much going on. There is a lot of innovation happening at the edges of those industries. I think that's really cool. I'd probably give a shout out, thinking about the medical industry. I've worked with a couple of customers in the past couple of years that are heavily focused on cancer research and solving the unsolvable diseases. That's amazing too, from a completely different perspective, less of the pure technology than just like, guys, I'm rooting for you.
Yeah,
Go fix
for
this.
it.
Whatever you need, we're in. Well, just tell us what you need. Like it's amazing to see the breadth of solutions that SaaS is getting into. IoT is another amazing area. Seeing all like how factory floors are being completely changed in terms of how they're working. Again, in industries that you wouldn't think are heavily reliant on SaaS, healthcare, fintech, manufacturing, are all starting to emerge into SaaS today. And that's to me, that's one of the more amazing innovations. You're asking for a specific technology, but that's the trend that I'm most interested in right now,
Yeah.
seeing
And
all these
I think
specific industries.
it's a great point. This is one of the things that back at Confluent amazed me the most is how technically sophisticated fast food restaurants actually are. And
Data
yeah,
driven down
they're
to the
on
T,
the
right?
edge. They need to
Yeah.
run what is essentially entire data centers on huge number of locations staffed by teenagers making minimum wage at most cases, and they
Yeah.
somehow have to make it all work. It's unbelievable.
It really is. Yeah. To me, that's been one of the more revealing things in the past year is some of these edge cases that I just assumed wouldn't have a lot of SaaS. Then you meet a customer like a SaaS provider doing amazing stuff in those spaces.
Yeah.
Kind of mind blowing.
Yeah, and it's one of those cases where we talked about kind of costing out things. The cost of downtime is like it's amazing how in some
Yeah.
industries it's impossible to say anything about the cost of downtime. And then in other industries, they know minute by minute. We're down
Yeah.
30 minutes. This is exactly how many people were paid because they were on the shift and couldn't really do anything. And this is how many customers went in but actually were left out because we couldn't service them. And they
Yeah.
know every single detail.
Exactly. Right. And the margins are so slim that they have to manage those margins like hawks, right? And any change, anything that interrupts those margins is a disaster for the day or the
Yeah.
month, even, right?
Restaurants, honestly, you're lucky if the margins are even positive. So I usually end with a bit of advice for SaaS developers, and I'm like, you gave nothing but advice to SaaS developers.
This is
Do you
all I
have a
do.
bit of advice that you've been living to the end?
Yeah. Maybe I do. Gwen, one thing that I've gotten out of working with the SaaS developer community, and I talk to a lot of the individuals on Slack, um, is make sure you're trying to connect and partner with your cloud provider. I've worked with a couple companies, really successful companies. I'll give a shout out to Little Horse. I really love what they're doing. I worked with them, got them talking a little bit with their AWS account team. There's a lot of programs, there's a lot of opportunities to really partner, to think of your cloud provider as a partner, not just a service provider. To the extent that you can do that, that you can find those inroads to talk to people from your cloud provider, find out what they can offer to you. Our cloud providers like AWS, we're looking to invest in the people who want to invest on building on AWS. And there's lots of programs to do that. There's lots of opportunities to sell through, to sell with your cloud provider. Make sure you don't forget about that. Make sure you don't forget that it isn't just signing up for AWS and start self-serving and using stuff. That's not the end of the journey. We want to be more. We want to get involved with you. We want to partner with what you're building, and to the extent that we can, we're excited to do so. So if you're in the developer community, if you're sitting on there, and you aren't talking, if you're building an AWS, if you aren't talking to your account team, if you aren't making those connections, reach out. I'd be happy to help however I can. And I think that's true for pretty much everyone from AWS who's sitting on that channel. Reach out and let us know if there's some way we can help make those connections for you.
Yeah, and I want to chime in on that because for most developers, they would literally do anything except reach out and talk to a human being. Obviously, much better to bang your head against a hard technical problem for 3 days than to open a support
Yeah.
ticket and ask why is he doing that.
Right.
So it's almost a competitive advantage to do something that nobody else would be doing. But
Yes.
also, if you think about it, one of the reasons that it's so prevalent to say SaaS is a business model is because people like Bill's team mostly hear from the business people because they're the ones who actually pick up the phone and talk. So if they hear more from developers, AWS may actually build more and more things for developers because they will know what
100%.
we need because we're having those conversations.
Yes.
So I really want to encourage everyone, both for your own good, but also for the greater good of letting the world and the vendors know that developers actually have things that they need in order to do a good job and write cool SaaS. And um, we need to partner to build that.
Yeah. Yeah, don't hesitate to reach out. And you're right. I mean, AWS is a data-driven company. Anytime I've gone to a service team and said, "Hey, I have customers who want to build this," they say, "Well, bring us a list of customers. We need to understand exactly what the scope is of what we're building and who's asking for it." We work backwards from customer use cases. If you come to us with use case, you may very well be supporting the decision that gets that decision made and gets that thing that you want built. So it's a two-way
Uh,
street.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you so much, Bill, for joining us and giving us a bit of behind the scenes of for most of us, our largest cloud provider.
Yeah, it's great talking to you, and thank you so much for doing the SaaS developer community, Gwen. It's a great experience for me to talk to other people who are building SaaS, and I passionately believe that there really is a need for a technical SaaS community out there for people who are building SaaS to actually talk and learn from one another. So thank you so much for doing this. I think it's amazing.